What if I told you that being the very first person to invent a brilliant, world-changing product is actually the fastest way to completely bankrupt your company?
It is, yeah. It's the ultimate counterintuitive truth in business. I mean, we are all raised on this myth, right? The visionary pioneer who gets to a market first and just wins it all.
Right, the Steve Jobs narrative.
Exactly. But when you look at the actual data, the story gets a lot more brutal.
It really does. So today we're looking at why the pioneers so often get slaughtered and, why the fast followers get rich. And that brings us to the central dilemma of today's deep dive into the source material. We are talking directly to you today. As you, yes, you listening right now, build a business or launch a product or even just navigate your own career, which is actually better. Do you want to dive into a market with fierce, cutthroat competition? Or do you want to find a space with absolutely zero competition at all?
It's a strategic crossroads that every founder or creator or even executive eventually hits. And the wild part is, depending on which billionaire you ask, you will get completely contradictory advice.
Totally. Which is why we have an incredible stack of sources to help us cut through the noise today. We are unpacking a comprehensive strategy document and market analysis from StartupLanes.
Yeah, which is a massive global business ecosystem and accelerator.
Right, and it's authored by their founder, Dr. Shir Gupta. These documents detail the exact frameworks that venture capitalists use to evaluate market dynamics, defensibility, and basically whether a company is going to survive.
And we should probably establish a rule right up front for our discussion today.
Uh,
We aren't just going to debate abstract economic philosophies, or throw around a bunch of jargon.
No, nobody wants that.
Right. We are going to analyze the hard data. We're looking at failure autopsies. And we are going to break down the specific mechanics of 10 global case studies. And these span from Estonia to Brazil to South Korea.
Our mission today is to decode exactly how to survive a blood-red, hyper-competitive market and reveal the specific blueprints some of the world's biggest companies use to make their competition entirely irrelevant. Okay, let's unpack this. Where do we even begin with this whole divide between wanting competition versus avoiding it?
Well, before we look at specific market structures, we really have to understand the two warring philosophies of competition, because these two mindsets literally dictate how billions of dollars of venture capital are deployed every single year.
Okay.
The first is what we can call the 0-to-1 monopoly quest.
This is essentially the Peter Thiel school of thought, right?
It is, yeah. The core argument here is pretty famous. It's that competition is for losers.
Harsh, but I get it.
Right. In this view, if you enter a market with perfect competition, let's say you open a standard coffee shop on a street that already has 5 other independent coffee shops, that competition is going to mathematically drive your profit margins down to 0.
Because you are all offering the exact same product.
Yep.
So if your latte is identical to the place next door, the only way you can win a customer is by lowering your price. It just becomes a race to the bottom.
Exactly. You spend all your energy fighting over pennies. So the goal in this philosophy is to build a monopoly in a completely uncontested space. You want to go from 0 to 1. You create a brand new pie rather than fighting for a tiny slice of an existing one.
Like PayPal.
Yes, PayPal is the classic example detailed in our sources. They didn't launch by trying to become, a global retail bank for everyone on day one. They targeted a micro niche.
eBay power sellers.
Right. These were people who desperately needed a fast, digital way to accept payments. PayPal built an absolute monopoly in that tiny ecosystem and then expanded outward. That is the 0-to-1 model, as opposed to fighting over a crowded, broad market, which is going from 1 to N.
But then, you have the complete counter perspective, the venture capital validation reality. Because if you walk into a room of seasoned investors right now and confidently declare, hey, we have absolutely no competitors.
They do not cheer.
No, they definitely don't. It is a massive red flag.
It's often the fastest way to get laughed out of a pitch meeting, actually.
And it makes perfect sense when you really think about it. If you throw a party and you are the only one there, you didn't invent a new type of highly exclusive gathering. You just threw a party on a Tuesday morning that nobody wanted to attend.
That's a great way to put it.
Right. If you have no competitors, it very often means the market simply doesn't exist, or no one is willing to open their wallet to solve that specific problem.
Which brings us to how Dr. Gupta synthesizes these two opposing views into a kind of Goldilocks zone.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah. Having zero competition usually means you are looking at a dead market. But hyper competition, entering a market with 50 well-funded giants fighting a pricing war, that's financial suicide.
Right.
So the sweet spot. You find a market with bad competition, and you execute 10 times better than they do.
You find a space where the money is already flowing, so the demand is totally validated, but the current solutions are just terrible. I love that framework.
Super practical.
But to find that Goldilocks zone, we first need to categorize what the battlefield actually looks like.
Hmm.
The sources use this incredibly vivid metaphor of oceans.
The red ocean versus the blue ocean framework.
Okay, break that down for us.
So a red ocean is your crowded, traditional marketplace. The boundaries are strictly defined, the rules of the game are known by everyone, and companies are just trying to outperform their rivals to grab a greater share of the existing demand.
And it's red because
Because of the blood in the water, from the cutthroat price wars and ruthless competition.
it's vicious. You are essentially fighting for scraps.
A blue ocean, conversely, is an uncontested market space. There are no direct competitors because you are fundamentally creating new demand.
Right.
Instead of making the traditional value-cost trade-off, meaning you either offer high quality for a high price or low quality for a low price, you break that trade-off entirely through a unique innovation. You offer high value and lower cost by completely changing the structure of the product.
And even within those oceans, our sources break down 5 distinct types of competition you might face. Let's look at these, because it really shifts how you view your rivals. First, you have direct competition.
Right, this is the obvious one. Coca-Cola versus Pepsi, McDonald's versus Burger King.
Yeah.
It is the same product targeting the same audience at the same price point.
Then you have indirect competition. These companies offer different products on a functional level, but they satisfy the exact same customer need or fight for the same limited budget.
Yeah. For example, a massive multiplex cinema isn't directly competing with a local bowling alley in terms of what they sell, but they are absolutely indirect competitors for your discretionary Friday night entertainment budget.
That makes total sense.
Yeah.
Then there is substitute competition. And this is where it gets existentially scary for legacy companies.
Oh, absolutely.
This is an entirely different product category that completely replaces the traditional offering. Like, streaming video didn't just compete with physical DVDs, it made the DVD player obsolete.
Or the smartphone. It substituted digital point-and-shoot cameras and standalone GPS devices entirely. I mean, nobody buys a Garmin for their dashboard anymore.
Exactly. The fourth type is brand or perceived competition. Here, the competitors offer similar functional products, but the battle is fought almost entirely on an emotional or identity level.
Think of Apple versus Samsung in the smartphone market, or Nike versus Adidas. They differentiate through lifestyle alignment, cultural cachet, and brand loyalty, rather than just comparing technical specifications.
Wait, let's pause on perceived competition for a second. If I'm a small business owner listening to this, how does that apply to me?
It applies because you have to realize that you aren't just selling the functional utility of your product. If you sell premium outdoor gear, your functional competitor might be, I don't know, a generic jacket on Amazon.
Right.
But your perceived competitor is the identity of being an outdoorsy person. You are competing on how the customer feels when they wear your logo versus the generic brand. The utility is the same. The perception is what commands the premium price.
Okay, so that's the how of competition. But the sources also detail the structures of the markets themselves. There are 4 core market structures in economics, and the real-world examples in the text really ground this. First is perfect competition.
Perfect competition is technically a theoretical economic model, but the closest real-world equivalents are heavily commoditized raw materials.
Like what?
Think of unbranded wheat farmers or independent crude oil extractors. There are countless small producers selling an identical standardized product. They have absolutely zero pricing power. They have to accept whatever the global market price dictates on that given day.
You can't charge double for your barrel of oil just because you gave it a cool, minimalist logo. It doesn't work.
It really doesn't. Then you step up to monopolistic competition. This is where you have many independent firms selling products that are similar but slightly differentiated.
So restaurants, clothing brands.
Exactly. Think of Starbucks, Nike, or Zara. Because their products have unique branding, store experiences, or designs, they hold minor pricing power. But the overall barriers to entry are pretty low, so there is always a new clothing brand or indie coffee shop popping up to challenge them.
Then we get into the heavyweights, the oligopoly or the duopoly. This is a very small number of massive, entrenched firms dominating the entire market. Boeing versus Airbus in commercial aviation, Apple versus Google Android in mobile operating systems.
And what truly defines an oligopoly is strategic interdependence.
Meaning what, exactly?
Meaning, if Apple makes a massive architectural change to privacy tracking on iOS, Google has to react almost immediately with Android. Their decisions are inextricably linked because they control the entire board.
It's terrifying to think about being a new entrant looking at an oligopoly. Imagine walking into your garage, looking at some spare parts and saying, yeah, I'm going to take on Boeing and Airbus today.
Good luck with that.
Right. The barriers to entry are astronomical. And finally, you have the pure monopoly, a single seller controlling the entire market.
Historically, De Beers with raw diamonds is a classic example. Or, looking at a statutory monopoly, the U.S. Postal Service holding exclusive rights over non-urgent letter mail. In a monopoly, you are a price maker, not a price taker. You dictate the terms.
So, hearing all this, if fighting in a crowded red ocean is a bloodbath that kills your margins, and fighting an oligopoly requires billions of dollars just to play the game, why wouldn't every single company just invent their own blue ocean?
It seems like the obvious choice.
Yeah. Why not just create a brand new category from scratch and be the pioneer?
Because being the pioneer comes with a massive and frequently fatal hidden tax. In venture capital, we call it the category creation education burden, or simply the education tax.
This is such a critical concept for anyone trying to launch something novel.
Hmm.
If you invent a completely new behavior or product, you don't just have to convince people to buy your brand. You have to convince them that the problem you solve actually exists in the first place.
That is the core issue. In an established market, there is search intent. People are going to Google and typing best CRM software for small business or cheapest flights to London. They know what they want.
They're already looking for a solution.
Exactly. But if you invent an entirely new category, there is zero existing search volume. No one is looking for you. You are paying 100% of the financial cost to educate the consumer.
Ouch.
Yeah. Your customer acquisition costs, or CAC, goes through the roof because your sales cycle is incredibly long. You literally have to teach them the vocabulary of your product before you can even pitch the product itself.
To use an analogy, it's like trying to sell the very first microwave oven. You aren't just selling a box that heats up food. You have to spend millions of dollars in advertising just to teach people that the invisible radiation won't poison their family.
Right, you're fighting fear and confusion.
That is an incredibly heavy lift for a startup with limited runway. And the sources provide these brutal autopsies of pioneer failures to illustrate this. Let's look at a couple of these because the mechanics of why they failed are profound. Let's take Cosmo.com from the early .com era.
Oh, Cosmo is a fascinating case study in the danger of being too early. So in the late 90s, they tried to pioneer the concept of one-hour delivery for snacks, DVDs, and convenience items.
Which today sounds like a totally normal service.
Right, we do it all the time. But back then, they were trying to build a blue ocean from scratch. Their fatal flaw was premature scale without fixing their unit economics.
Wait, let's break down unit economics for the listener. What was actually happening on the ground with the Cosmo order?
So unit economics simply means, does this single transaction make us money or lose us money?
Okay.
Cosmo was promising free delivery with no minimum order size, so a customer would order a $3 candy bar online. Cosmo would then pay a bicycle messenger roughly $10 in labor to bike across Manhattan to deliver that $3 candy bar.
Oh my God.
Yeah, they were losing $7 on every single order, just hoping they could figure out the logistics later. They were spending all their venture capital subsidizing the consumer's habit, trying to educate them to order online, and they burned through hundreds of millions of dollars before going bankrupt.
They paid the entire education tax and then died before they can reap the rewards.
Yeah.
What about Juicero? This is one of my favorite spectacular failures in Silicon Valley history.
Juicero is the perfect example of over-engineering a solution that adds friction instead of removing it. They created a Wi-Fi connected, beautifully designed juicing machine that cost around $700.
$700 for a juicer.
Yes, and it used proprietary, pre-packaged pouches of diced fruits and vegetables. The machine would squeeze the pouch into your glass.
So they were trying to be the Keurig of green juice.
Exactly. But the market education failed instantly when consumers realized a fundamental flaw.
Yeah.
You didn't actually need the $700 machine. You could take the proprietary juice pouch, squeeze it hard with your own two bare hands, and the exact same juice would pour out, often faster than the machine could do it.
That is amazing.
They tried to create a blue ocean, but introduced a product that was infinitely more complicated and expensive than the manual alternative.
Novelty is not a value proposition. If you aren't removing friction, you are just a gimmick. We see this with the Apple Newton in the 90s trying to pioneer the PDA category before handwriting recognition was actually functional.
Or Google Glass trying to pioneer wearable face computers before society was ready to accept hidden cameras staring at them in coffee shops.
Yes. Or Doppler Labs with microacoustics. Or the Microsoft Zune or SocialNet trying to be a multi-purpose matching algorithm before people even understood what a social network was.
Which really raises the most important question of this entire segment.
Okay, lay it on me.
If the pioneer bears all the massive R&D costs, navigates all the uncharted regulatory friction, spends millions educating the consumer on what the category even is, and still fails 47% of the time according to historical market data, who actually wins?
The fast followers.
Hmm.
The winners are the ones who sit back, let the pioneers spend all their money building the metaphorical road, and then drive their sports car on it for free.
The strategic blueprint of the second mover, or the fast follower, is remarkably consistent across industries. They observe the pioneer's mistakes. They completely avoid the education tax because the consumer now understands the product category.
Right, the hard work is done.
Exactly. So they focus all their capital on scaling the business model, and they deliver a user experience that is vastly superior to the clunky first-generation attempt.
The historical case studies here are legendary. Let's look at the mechanics of Facebook. Yeah. Everyone forgets that Facebook was absolutely not the first social network. Friendster and MySpace pioneered the category. MySpace was actually the most visited website in the entire United States at one point.
It was massive.
So how did Mark Zuckerberg walk in years late and destroy them?
Well, MySpace was the pioneer, but it had fatal user experience, or UX, flaws. Because they were figuring it out as they went, MySpace allowed unrestricted HTML customization. Users could completely code their own profiles.
Which sounds cool in theory, right? Total freedom.
In theory, yes. In practice, it meant profiles were chaotic, visually jarring messes with auto-playing music, broken images, and massive load times. Furthermore, MySpace relied on anonymous screen names, which inevitably led to a massive influx of spam and creepy behavior.
Enter Facebook.
Right. They were years late. But they observed the chaos of MySpace and fixed it. Facebook rigidly enforced a real name policy, which created accountability and trust. They created a clean, uniform, minimalist UI that loaded instantly. And they manufactured incredible desirability by launching only at Harvard initially, creating a scarcity-driven rollout. They didn't invent the social network, they just fixed the pioneer's mess.
The Apple iPod is another perfect example of this. So many people think Apple invented the MP3 player. They didn't. A company called Diamond Multimedia launched the Rio MP3 player a full 3 years before the iPod.
But the early MP3 players were awful. They held maybe 10 or 15 songs, and transferring those songs required these thick parallel port cables that took forever.
Apple waited. They watched the market. And then they struck when two specific underlying technologies matured. They found a new 1.8-inch micro hard drive from Toshiba that could hold 1,000 songs. And they utilized FireWire cables instead of parallel ports.
And for the listener, the difference in speed there was revolutionary. Transferring a full CD of music to an early MP3 player took about 5 minutes. With FireWire on the iPod, it took 10 seconds.
Wow.
Apple didn't have to educate the market on what digital music was. Diamond Rio already did that. Apple just solved the storage and the friction issues completely.
Even the quintessential American business story, McDonald's, is a fast follower narrative. White Castle actually invented the fast food kitchen assembly line back in 1921. They pioneered the burger joint.
But the founders were extremely conservative with capital and largely refused to franchise. Decades later, Ray Kroc observed the speed system developed by the McDonald brothers in California, added the drive-through model, and aggressively franchised the concept to capture the post-World War II suburban boom.
So for you listening to this right now, I want you to ask yourself this directly. Are you trying to invent a completely new behavior for your customers, forcing them to learn a new way of living? Or are you just removing the friction from something they already desperately want to do? Because the data shows that one of those paths is vastly more expensive and riskier than the other.
If you choose the latter path, removing friction from an existing desire, you are deciding to enter an existing market. You are entering a red ocean. But to survive a blood-red ocean with established incumbents, you need a serious weapon. You cannot just show up and be marginally better.
Right. If you walk into a crowded market and your entire pitch is, well, we are 10% cheaper, or our software has slightly rounder buttons, the established giants are just going to crush you with their massive marketing budgets. You won't even make a dent.
This is what Dr. Gupta calls the competitor density test. To overcome the natural status quo bias of consumers, because people are fundamentally lazy and don't want to switch products unless they have to, your product must be 10 times better in one of three specific areas: cost, speed, or UX.
10 times better. Not a little better. An order of magnitude better. The sources highlight Amazon Web Services, or AWS, as the ultimate example of a 10x cost improvement. Let's break down the mechanics here because it's brilliant. Before AWS, if you wanted to start a tech company, you had to deal with CapEx.
Let's define that for clarity. CapEx stands for capital expenditure. It means massive upfront costs. In the early 2000s, launching a website meant you had to literally buy physical servers, heavy metal boxes, and rent physical space in a data center to plug them in.
Right, the barriers were huge.
It cost hundreds of thousands of dollars before you even wrote a line of code.
So how did AWS flip that?
Well, Amazon had built this massive server infrastructure for their own e-commerce needs, specifically to handle the holiday shopping rush. But for the other 10 months of the year, those servers were sitting largely idle.
Just burning cash.
Exactly. So they decided to rent out that excess compute power over the internet. They shifted the industry from CapEx to OpEx operational expenditure. Instead of buying a $100,000 server, a startup could rent a tiny fraction of Amazon's server for a few dollars an hour and just pay as they go. They lowered the initial infrastructure cost of starting a tech company by more than 10x.
Incredible. And for the speed category, look at Stripe. If you are a founder trying to accept credit cards on your website before Stripe came along, it was a nightmare of API development and bank underwriting.
To put that in plain English, bank underwriting meant you had to apply for a merchant account at a legacy bank. You had to fax them your business plan, wait weeks for a human to review your risk profile, and hope they approved you.
It was so tedious.
And then API development meant you had to hire a specialized developer to write complex code to securely connect your website to the bank's archaic payment gateways. It took weeks and cost thousands.
Stripe looked at that and turned that entire agonizing process into 7 lines of code. A developer could copy that snippet, paste it into their website, and be accepting credit cards from anywhere in the world in 10 minutes. A 10x reduction in time.
And for UX, user experience, Uber is the classic example. Replacing the anxiety of standing in the rain, waving frantically for a taxi, and hoping you have enough cash in your wallet with a single tap on a glass screen, the friction was entirely removed.
To really understand how a company survives a red ocean, we need to dive deep into 2 specific case studies from the StartupLanes document. The first is Zoom.
Yes. If we rewind to 2011, the video conferencing market was an absolute bloodbath of a red ocean. You had massive entrenched giants: Cisco's WebEx, Microsoft's Skype, Citrix, Google Hangouts. Entering that market looked like pure madness on paper. There was no room left.
But Eric Yuan, the founder of Zoom, recognized a fundamental flaw in the mechanics of the incumbents. He knew that the legacy architectures of WebEx and Skype were built in an era of stable, hardwired office networks. They were designed primarily for screen sharing, not high-definition video.
That's why calls in 2011 always dropped, the audio always desynced from the video, and you had to download these heavy software clients that required admin privileges on your work computer. It was a miserable experience.
Zoom passed the 10x test by engineering a video-first architecture entirely from scratch. They didn't just add a new coat of paint to old code.
No, they built a system that could dynamically monitor the user's internet connection. If you were on a bad cellular network and experiencing up to 40% packet loss, meaning almost half your data was dropping out, Zoom's backend would automatically degrade the video quality to prioritize the audio stream, keeping the call alive when Skype would have simply crashed.
And they killed the 10-digit passcode prompts. Before Zoom, joining a conference call meant dialing a phone number, typing in a meeting ID, and then an attendee PN. Zoom replaced all of that friction with a single one-click URL. They didn't try to win the red ocean by adding 20% more enterprise features. They just made the connection incredibly reliable and frictionless.
The second deep dive is from India, focusing on Zomato and Swiggy. The Indian food delivery market in the late 2010s was a hyper-competitive, cash-burning slaughterhouse. You had massive companies aggressively discounting meals just to buy market share, dealing with immense logistics overhead, and fighting for every single customer.
Standard advice would say, get out of that market, find a blue ocean. But they didn't flee, they fought it out.
They leaned into the complexity. They survived by mastering absolute operational discipline. They built proprietary machine learning routing algorithms to slash delivery drop times by optimizing the exact routes drivers took through heavy traffic.
That's smart.
But more importantly, they pivoted their massive logistics networks into quick commerce, delivering groceries in 10 minutes through dense urban dark store networks.
The notes here detail a fascinating sub-war in this red ocean. Zomato acquired a company called Blinkit to fight off a rival named Zepto in this 10-minute grocery delivery space. And Blinkit now holds around 50% market share. How did they win that specific, brutal slice of the red ocean?
By fundamentally changing their unit economics on the back end, Blinkit uses what is called a 1P or first-party inventory model.
Let's break that down. What does 1P actually mean for their bottom line?
While most delivery apps use a 3P or third-party model, they are just a digital middleman connecting you to a local grocery store, and they take a small 5% commission on the sale. In a 1P model, Blinkit acts as the grocery store.
Oh, I see.
They literally buy the apples, the milk, and the snacks from the suppliers, store them in their own micro warehouses, and sell them directly to you. Because they own the inventory, they capture the full 30 or 40% retail margin rather than a tiny commission.
Ah, so they're capturing vastly more revenue per order.
Furthermore, instead of doing weekly inventory restocks like a traditional supermarket, they execute daily purchase orders based on real-time data. This minimizes the amount of fresh food that goes bad and frees up their working capital. They won the red ocean by out-executing everyone else on the invisible back-end logistics.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. We've seen how you can survive a red ocean through sheer force, operational discipline, and 10x execution. But what if you could pull off a strategic magic trick? What if you could transform a red ocean into a blue one?
This is considered the ultimate strategic flex in business. You aren't just fighting better, you are redefining the very rules of engagement so your competitors are suddenly rendered completely irrelevant. The sources provide masterclasses from around the globe on how to orchestrate this kind of market escape.
Let's start with strategic repositioning, or the pivot. Netflix is the famous U.S. example here. We all know they started in the red ocean of physical DVD mail rentals, fighting Blockbuster head-to-head on late fees and inventory. But Reed Hastings saw broadband internet speeds increasing, and he made the massive, risky pivot to transition the entire company into digital streaming.
And by transitioning to streaming, Netflix unlocked a blue ocean characterized by a zero marginal cost of distribution.
Meaning what, exactly?
In the DVD business, if 1 million people want to watch a movie, you have to manufacture, store, and mail 1 million physical plastic discs. The costs scale linearly. In streaming, once the movie's on the server, it costs essentially the same amount of money to deliver that data stream to one person as it does to 10 million people. The marginal cost of the next user drops to near zero.
They rendered Blockbuster's massive competitive advantage, their physical real estate of thousands of retail stores, completely obsolete before the studios even realized what was happening.
The Swedish company Spotify did something very similar in the music industry. Daniel Ek looked at the early 2000s music scene, which was a disastrous, chaotic red ocean. On one side, you had rampant illegal piracy with platforms like BitTorrent and LimeWire gutting industry revenues. On the other side, you had litigious, rigid record labels trying to sue teenagers for downloading Metallica songs.
Instead of fighting the pirates on technology or fighting the labels in court, Spotify created a legal freemium model.
Right.
But saying they created a legal freemium model is one thing. How on earth did Daniel Ek walk into boardrooms with these legacy record labels who were terrified of the internet and convince them to just give their music away for free on a computer?
That is the brilliant mechanic of Spotify's escape. Ek essentially used the sheer destruction of piracy as his leverage. He went to the labels and said, "You are bleeding out. Piracy is winning. You cannot stop it through lawsuits. But if you give me the rights to your entire catalog, I will build a streaming service that is faster, safer, and fundamentally easier to use than hunting for malware-infected MP3s on LimeWire. And I will give you an equity stake in my company."
He made the legal route easier than the illegal route.
Exactly. He proved that most people aren't malicious, they just want convenience. By aligning with the record labels and offering instant zero-wait streaming, Spotify eventually paid out over $11 billion to the music industry in a single year. They killed piracy by offering a vastly superior legal blue ocean.
Then you have the strategy of finding white space, or the flank. Look at Bolt from Estonia. Marcus Villig started this ride-hailing company when he was 19 years old. When Uber was raising billions of dollars from venture capitalists to conquer San Francisco, London, and New York in a massive red ocean land grab, Bolt didn't try to fight them head-on in those markets.
That would have been financial annihilation. Uber simply had too much capital. They would have subsidized rides until Bolt went bankrupt. Instead, Bolt deliberately targeted secondary European cities and rapidly urbanizing African megacities, markets that the Silicon Valley incumbents were largely ignoring because they didn't fit the traditional premium tech narrative.
Yeah. And their operational tactic was brilliant. They offered significantly lower driver commissions, usually under 20%, whereas competitors were taking 25 or 30%. So Bolt won the supply side, the drivers, by putting more money in their pockets, all while avoiding the insanely expensive marketing wars in Western capitals.
Yeah, and today they operate in over 600 cities. They flanked the giants.
A very similar flanking maneuver happened in Brazil with Nubank. This is one of the most successful fintech stories in history. David Velez, the founder, saw that the Brazilian banking sector was a stagnant, highly concentrated oligopoly.
I want to pause on Nubank, actually, because the banking sector in Brazil wasn't just crowded, it was actively hostile to the consumer.
Hostile is putting it mildly. 5 massive banks controlled 80% of the entire market. Because they had no real competition, they were charging exorbitant interest rates, upwards of 300% annually on credit cards.
Wow.
They charged terrible fees just to maintain a basic checking account. And the customer service was notoriously horrendous. People would spend hours waiting in line at physical branches just to speak to a teller behind bulletproof glass.
So Velez and his co-founders launched Nubank. But they didn't try to build a better physical bank. They didn't build a single branch. They launched a sleek, purple, zero-fee credit card managed entirely on a mobile app.
By eliminating the massive overhead of physical real estate, security guards, and thousands of teller salaries, they created a structural cost advantage that the legacy banks could not match. They targeted tech-savvy urban millennials who were completely neglected by the legacy institutions.
And their marketing was ingenious. Because they didn't have a massive advertising budget, they used a gamified waiting list to create viral scarcity. You had to be invited by a friend to get the purple card.
It turned a financial product into a status symbol. And today, Nubank has 131 million customers globally. In Brazil alone, they serve over 60% of the entire adult population. They completely escape the red ocean by simply refusing to adopt the predatory, high-friction practices of the incumbents.
If we zoom out and look at another escape route, it's what we can call democratizing the elite, or the bottom-up approach. The perfect case study here is Canva out of Australia.
Melanie Perkins. She was teaching graphic design to university students and saw them spending an entire semester just learning where the buttons were in Adobe Photoshop and InDesign. Adobe absolutely dominated the professional graphic design market. It was a red ocean of expensive, heavy desktop software with a brutal, steep learning curve.
So Canva looked at that dynamic and ignored the professionals entirely. They didn't try to build a slightly better version of Photoshop to compete with Adobe. That would have been a losing battle. Instead, they built a browser-based, template-driven blue ocean for everyday non-designers, teachers, small business owners, social media managers.
They took the terrifying blank canvas of professional tools and replaced it with drag-and-drop templates. They made it completely free for educators. They democratized the ability to create good design for people who didn't have a design degree.
And now, they have 200 million monthly active users and generate over $2.5 billion in annualized revenue. They won by targeting the billions of people that Adobe was ignoring because they weren't professionals.
The final escape route, detailed in our sources, relies on uncompromising intellectual property and design. Look at Samsung in South Korea.
Right.
For decades, they were trapped in a low-cost red ocean. They were viewed globally as cheap, derivative copycats of premium Japanese and Western electronics.
But they changed the narrative by pouring billions into proprietary R&D and vertical integration. Instead of just assembling parts bought from other people, they started inventing and manufacturing their own components. Now they lead the blue ocean of foldable smartphones, and more critically, they are a primary supplier of advanced HBM memory chips.
Let's clarify what HBM means, because it's the invisible engine of the modern economy, high-bandwidth memory. These are wildly complex, vertically stacked microchips that allow massive amounts of data to be processed almost instantly. They are the essential plumbing for the global artificial intelligence boom.
By mastering this incredibly difficult manufacturing process, Samsung engineered their way entirely out of the cheap consumer electronics tier and into an incredibly lucrative, high-barrier blue ocean.
Nintendo did the exact same thing in Japan with the Switch console. Sony and Microsoft were locked in this brutal red ocean specs war, bleeding their profit margins to build consoles with more teraflops and 4K graphics capabilities.
Teraflops basically being a measure of raw mathematical computing power for rendering hyper-realistic graphics. It becomes a zero-sum game of hardware cannibalization where you sell the console at a loss just to lock players into your ecosystem.
Right, and Nintendo simply refused to play that game. They stepped completely out of the arena. They built a hybrid portable console, Blue Ocean. The Switch wasn't about raw graphical power. It couldn't compete with an Xbox on specs. It was about accessibility, local family multiplayer, and leveraging their untouchable proprietary IP like Mario, Zelda, and Pokemon.
Because they weren't competing on bleeding-edge graphics hardware, they sold over 140 million units at a profit from day one. You couldn't compare it to an Xbox because it was doing something entirely different.
And we see this in software too, with Shopify in Canada. The e-commerce world was a red ocean dominated by Amazon and eBay. But those are marketplaces. In a marketplace, the individual seller is heavily commoditized, hidden behind the platform's overarching branding, and constantly squeezed by rising fulfillment fees.
Shopify realized that and didn't try to build another marketplace to fight Amazon. They built the infrastructure for the rebellion. They created a software-as-a-service blue ocean that empowered independent merchants to build their own branded storefronts, own their direct relationship with the customer, and retain their own data. They shifted the power back to the creator.
And lastly on this list of escapes, we have to talk about Dyson in the UK. The vacuum market in the 80s and 90s was a sleepy, boring red ocean of cheap, disposable appliances. They all required you to constantly buy these annoying paper replacement bags, and as the bag filled up, the vacuum invariably lost suction.
James Dyson spent 15 years trying to escape that trap.
The notes say he built over 5,000 prototypes. 5,000. Can you imagine the sheer persistence required to fail 4,999 times in your shed? It's like Thomas Edison with a light bulb, but for cleaning your carpets.
But the result of that persistence was an engineering marvel. He created a bagless, transparent, cyclonic vacuum. Instead of a bag that clogged, it used centrifugal force to spin the gust out of the air, meaning it literally never lost suction. He then priced this machine at a massive premium as a luxury hardware item, breaking all the category pricing rules.
He transformed a dusty, annoying household chore into a high-performance lifestyle status symbol. People were suddenly proud to leave their vacuum out in the living room. And he reinvested those massive profit margins into building an independent R&D empire that now makes everything from hair dryers to air purifiers.
So we arrive at the final phase of the strategy. Whether you fought tooth and nail to survive a red ocean, or you magically invented a pristine blue ocean through brilliant positioning, eventually you will have a massive target on your back. The fast followers will come for you. And that means you need to build a fortress. You need an economic moat.
And economic moats are engineered. They are rarely accidental. The StartupLanes framework breaks defensibility down into 4 core pillars. Let's walk through these. First, network effects. This is based on Metcalfe's law. The product gets exponentially more valuable as more users join the network.
The sources use Figma as an excellent modern example here. It's browser-based design software. When a designer invites a software developer and a marketing copywriter to collaborate on a live canvas, the utility of the platform increases for everyone involved. Plus, they built a cross-site network where community members build custom plugins for each other. The tool gets better simply because other people are using it.
But hold on, let me push back on network effects being this perfect, impenetrable moat. What happens when a network turns toxic? Doesn't the network effect work in reverse?
That is a phenomenal point, and yes, it absolutely can. A network effect accelerates growth on the way up, but it accelerates collapse on the way down if the utility or culture degrades. Look at Yik Yak or Secret. These were anonymous social apps that scaled rapidly through direct network effects on college campuses.
I remember those.
Right, but because they lacked persistent identity or moderation, the networks filled with bullying and abuse. The very thing that made them grow, everyone interacting, made them toxic, leading to rapid, catastrophic churn. So a network moat requires constant curation.
Okay, the second moat pillar, switching costs. This is a total cost measured in money, time, lost data, and operational risk for a customer to switch from your product to a competitor. Salesforce is the prime example here.
Salesforce is a massive CRM platform, but it is not famous for having a beautiful, modern, intuitive UI. Often it's quite clunky, but replacing it is an absolute nightmare for an enterprise.
The notes mention custom schemas and RevOps dependencies. In plain English, that basically means your entire business is hooked up to their plumbing, right? It's like realizing you want a slightly better shower head, but to install it, you have to rip out the concrete foundation of your entire house.
That is the perfect way to look at it. A custom schema means you have molded Salesforce to fit your specific corporate data structure over years. You've connected it to your marketing software, your finance software, your supply chain. And the RevOps employees, revenue operations, they are the certified plumbers you hired who only know how to work on that specific brand of Salesforce pipes.
So you suck.
If you try to switch to a sleeker competitor, the friction, retraining costs, and risk of losing data are so high that customers simply stay. The switching cost is the moat.
Pillar 3 is cost advantages, or scale economies. Think of the Amazon flywheel. Amazon spent decades sinking tens of billions of dollars into massive fulfillment centers, robotics, and logistics networks. Because they process billions of individual packages, their fixed infrastructure cost divided per package is incredibly, almost impossibly low.
They can negotiate bulk parcel rates with shipping carriers that no startup could ever hope to match. This allows them to offer fast, free shipping, which draws in more customers, which gives them more scale, which lowers their costs further. It creates a structural barrier to entry that is nearly impossible to replicate without infinite capital.
Finally, the fourth pillar, intangible assets. These are non-physical advantages. This includes brand equity, which is what allows Apple to command 45% hardware margins on their phones, while Android makers fight over single-digit margins for functionally similar devices. It includes patents, which legally protect biotech and pharma companies from being copied. And critically, it includes regulatory approvals.
Regulatory moats are incredibly powerful. Take Stripe Atlas. They help founders incorporate businesses globally. Navigating the labyrinth of global banking compliance, international anti-money laundering laws, and tax codes across 150 countries is a massive regulatory headache.
It's a nightmare.
If a new startup wants to compete with Stripe in that space, they have to hire an absolute army of specialized lawyers just to get to the starting line. The red tape itself becomes the fortress protecting Stripe's business.
Exactly. When you architect a business, you must intentionally design at least one of these four pillars network effects: switching costs, scale economies, or intangible assets into your model from day one.
All right, let's bring this entire massive topic back to the center. We started with the fundamental question, competition versus no competition, which is actually better.
The synthesis of all these global case studies, these failure autopsies, and these VC frameworks is that neither extreme is inherently safe. If you have absolutely no competition, you face the crippling category creation education burden. You might run out of cash before the market even understands what you do. You might end up being Cosmo or Juicero.
But if you dive headfirst into intense competition in a red ocean without a weapon, you will simply bleed out in endless price wars. Unless, of course, you have a 10x differentiator in cost, speed, or UX.
The ultimate lesson of this entire analysis comes down to a brilliant quote from Dr. Shishir Gupta in the StartupLanes documents. He says, "In a red ocean, you fight for scraps. In a blue ocean, you design the feast."
It's about intentionality. Are you reacting to the market or are you shaping it?
And for those of you listening who are wanting to dig deeper into these frameworks, to refine your own market positioning, and intentionally build your own economic moats, you absolutely have to check out the source ecosystem for today's deep dive, StartupLanes.com. They are doing incredible work connecting ambitious founders with top-tier investors globally and providing the exact structural advice we've talked about today.
It's a phenomenal resource for moving beyond just having a good idea and actually understanding the true mechanical realities of defensibility and survival.
So as we wrap up, I want to connect all this macroeconomic theory back to you. I want you to think back to that compass we talked about at the very beginning, that spinning needle trying to guide your career, your unique skill set, or the specific project you're working on right now. I want you to turn the lens directly on yourself. Look at your industry. Are you currently fighting in a blood-red ocean, competing on the exact same resume bullet points, the exact same software features, or the exact same pricing as thousands of other people? Or are you actively designing a blue ocean? Are you combining your unique skills, your weird interests, your specific background in a way that makes you the only option in the room?
You have to ask yourself, are you playing their game or are you inventing your own?
Stop competing on their terms. Stop fighting for scraps. Start creating your own feast. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the source material. We'll see you next time.